The jobs that I did. Okay, so let's go back to way back before I was born, because I look a lot like my dad, and we have one thing in common, which is that we don't work that well within a fixed organization, I suppose. So we need to have a sense of freedom and the ability to do our own things and follow our own routes. And that was true for my dad as well. So this is also why he had an IT firm. He had been in IT actually since it first became a thing, at least in the Netherlands. So he started working in that sector in the early 1970s, around 1970. There was in corporate environments, then there was an economic downturn in the 1980s, and that was basically, this is a long story short, but that sparked his own entrepreneurship. He started making software for administrative purposes, for industrial users, bakeries and stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was what I witnessed in the early 1980s. My dad building code and, putting on a suit and going to the customer and implement all that kind of stuff. And selling hardware was something that came with it, because that software needed to run on something. So he needed to import the hardware and sell it off. And it was kind of a sideshow. And then come the 1990s, the sideshow became the main theme. I mean, hardware, lifted off. Computers became affordable for home users. So his business kind of shifted from building custom-made software to delivering hardware to private users, corporate users. And these were usually really domestic users up to small, medium enterprises, schools, educational institutes. Usually not the really big organizations.
But it went hand in hand with the PC revolution.
It went absolutely hand in hand with the PC revolution. And you have to keep in mind that back in those days, 1990s, the product was not commoditized the way it is right now. So it was not really an off-the-shelf product. So he basically bought the components and then assembled, built to order, and also built to the specifications that sort of met the needs of the customers. So everything was really custom made. And that was still possible because you still had the financial slack, and there was the profit margin still allowed to do that, to put in that kind of effort. This was a really small operation. It was like just my dad and, a few guys, helping out once in a while, maybe a few times a week if there was a lot of work. And this was really, this relied on passion, personal interest in the technology. Yeah. We had a subscription to CT magazine. It still exists. It's a German magazine.
Yeah, I know that magazine very well.
Exactly. I mean, you come from Germany, so you're obviously familiar with it. And even, back then, I'm not sure, I haven't read it in a while, but it was really the best for in-depth information on what's new and what's hot. So that was kind of the stuff that as a kid, so here the story becomes a bit more personal. As a kid, I always looked forward to actually receiving the new CT magazine. I think it was bi-weekly, so 2 times a month. And we got it obviously in German. There was a Dutch translation where it was like super thin. We didn't use that. So I learned to read German through actually reading a CT magazine.
That's beautiful.
And I think I understood like 40% of it. So it was not too bad.
That's pretty good.
It was good enough. And so I must have been like 12, 13, 14 years old. And obviously, having the company literally at home, we were living between the boxes of monitors and main boards and keyboards, and you get infected with it in a way. And I remember that when I was 15, my dad took me on sort of a business trip. Basically, he had just sold a 100 megabit network to a customer in The Hague, and 100 megabit back in 1994
that was fast.
So that was fast. And this was not a regular Ethernet. This was 100 VG from HP. It was also a niche product. And they had all these fancy PCI cards in the server and in the workstations. And long story short, the network card in the server didn't work. And you have to keep in mind, this was the days of MS-DOS. And I think the server was running Novel Network. Okay. And they didn't get it to work. HP support was cold. They weren't able to help either. And as sort of a last resort, I didn't know much about computers anyway. I knew a command prompt, And my dad said, why don't you give it a try? And I was like, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was fiddling for 10 minutes or so. And then for some magical reason, it worked. And everybody was like, how did you do that? And I said, I don't know. And I thought, but I need to find out. And
which is what many more IT people actually should admit from time to time. I don't know.
No, but this was trial and error.
Yeah.
And I learned the scientific method a decade later. So I just, did something, make it up as I went along. And that's where it started. So I was 15, and from that point on, I became to work systematically in the business, assembling computers, advising people, and mainly a lot of troubleshooting. And so that's what I did until the early 2000s. Then my dad turned 65, and he said, well, I'm going to quit. I've worked enough in my life, and the choice is up to you. I was in university back then studying information management. My dad basically gave me the choice. Either I'm gonna stop the business, so I'm gonna kill it, maybe sell it off or something. It was a really small business, or I'm gonna give it to you to play with, basically. And I said, I can, it's nice to do. Next to my study, and I'm not going to study full time anyway because that bores me. So I'll do the nice customers and the high value added things, and basically get rid of the rest. Basically, let it bleed a little bit and just keep maybe 20% of the business.
Right.
And that's what I did for a few years, along with my studies. Sort of have a plaything. And earned a little money with that. It was not that much, but it allowed me to do the fun stuff. And of course, by that time, the market became more of a commodity.
More standardization.
There was still a little niche, like where I could focus on very high value added customers, architects, that kind of business. They had very specific requirements. But I kind of foresaw that was a temporary thing as well. Within a few years that would end. So basically, by the time I went to do my master's degree, my research, I decided I'm going to focus full on that research for 6 months and then find a real job, something like that. So that was basically the end of the business. We basically let it taper out, sort of. In the end, I kind of sold off the contacts to another small company, a guy living nearby, and I said, like, here's the customers, and take good care of them.
Right.
And I'm not really sure if he did, but I hope so.